Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Whole Perspective. My name is Kevin Delory, Chief Lending Officer at EPM. You might notice a different guest than normal, and that is El Presidente. He is our co-host today. Him and Kenny do have a lot in common. They're both taller than me, but I think that's where it ends. So we have a great show today. Today we have Bret Packard, and if you haven't consumed his content, and you are in our industry, the mortgage industry, you should be, because everything is so relatable on how to get through tough times. Bret has a proven track record of building elite performers and teams for 30 years across 30 countries in international banking and wealth management space. He runs large, complex, high-growth businesses and an array of product lines while serving as executive director on subsidiary boards of the largest banks in two countries. Bret has a well-established track record of building highly engaged, productive teams that deliver world-class experience with sufficient cost basis. I could go on for the 30 minutes talking about Bret's background, but there's so many good questions that I think a lot of the audience really want to hear. You know, we're in these tough times that, some are saying it's tough. Some other people are growing in this time. And I can't wait to ask you some questions, Bret, because I was listening to some of your content. It's so spot on. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, you were talking about how people jump on a bandwagon because everyone else is doing it. But when you do that, here's my take on it, that you might lose because the person's bandwagon to jump on is the brains of the operation. Like Phil controls, the secondary market. If he makes a move and you jump on his bandwagon, how do you know when it's time to pivot and make the move that he's already made? So, why is it so important to be your own individual, be your own company, not follow the leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, the disclaimer here would be that in some cases, the bandwagon, depending on the timing, it gets back to the old adage of, do you want to time the market or do you want to spend time in the market? And then what's your philosophy and your values? And I've always believed, as a global wealth manager, dealing with, and I'll put something out there, foreign currency business, right? I ran very large foreign currency businesses, and you can't predict currency rates, right, any more than you can predict, you pick any other type of any interest rate or economic indicator. It's very difficult to predict, but especially foreign currency, the volatility is ultra high. I've been paid salaries in US dollars and pound sterling, many other currencies there as well. And some years, my wife and I would say, wow, because we repatriated the dollars back to US dollar, because that's where kind of our home retirement will be. That's where I am right now. So some years with the same base salary, we lost out big time. And some years we made a windfall, and we don't control that. So I think that's a great example of the bandwagon approach, that look, some things you can't control, other things you can, but you have to really stick to what the value is. If I would have changed my career to guess, well, maybe I should move from the UK to Japan because my outlook on the yen is, that's not the type of thing that you would do. And the bandwagon, my point on the bandwagon approach is that there are societal norms that are being influenced and created by some people that, i.e. the corporate media is a great example, okay, that they want people to believe a certain narrative, for example, but yet it may not be in their best interest because they may not have the reporting. I did a post the other day on LinkedIn asking people, I did a poll. Did you hear earlier this year about the balloon that was in the air at 60,000 feet? And of course, everybody heard about that. And then the other part of the poll was, did you hear about the green lasers at Pearl Harbor? Very few people had heard about those. Okay. And probably those watching this, very few have heard about it. Some may have, but you can Google that later and see what that was all about as well. But the society today tends to lack critical thinking, or at least the forces of corporate media are not encouraging critical thinking, and critical thinking, the business that you two gentlemen do, for example, you have to think, otherwise you're dead, right? At what you do, you have to think and take action based on your values, your beliefs, the information you have. Sometimes you're wrong, sometimes you're right, but just to get on the bandwagon because the media reports a narrative about something may not be in your best interest, because what if they're withholding information from you, such as the green lasers and Pearl Harbor? You can look that up later. A lot of people might want to know that. Okay. A lot of people might want to know the latest in the United States, for example, is the leakage of intelligence on the Ukraine war. And it was interesting looking at the press conference yesterday that not one media asked what was actually in the documents. They were all focused on going after the guy that leaked it. So the point is, but if you start to peel what's in those documents, peel the onion apart, which is not being reported, it looks like the U.S. is fighting against Russia in the war. And that goes against the narrative that's out there as well. So as a citizen of the U.S., maybe you're pro go after Russia and start a war. Maybe you're not. But those are a couple of examples in the news about why it's important not to just hear something, consume something, and then accept that it's real. You should, do your own research and find those green lasers when you hear about a balloon, because there's usually more to the story. I hope that long-winded answer helped out, Kevin.
I love it. I've said many times about the fact that we have to sort of unplug from the matrix nowadays. We're just sort of so consumed with headlines, so consumed with yesterday's news, so consumed with our own narrative that I think, to your very astute point, the critical thinking that's required in running businesses, in capital markets, is about being, going where the puck is headed, not where the puck is or has been. And, when you talk about, elite performers, one of the things, that Kevin has been talking about, about your donkey comment. I know he's going to want you to elaborate, on that, but we get sort of so wrapped up in excuses, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at one of the things that's going on right now in capital markets that's been in all the headlines for the last 6, 7, 8 months is the inversion of the yield curve and how that's a predictor of a recession. The yield curve has nothing to do with a recession. What the inverted yield curve has to do with is that bond traders, who are about as much critical thinkers as any industry, any profession, any individual might be. What they're saying is, you're telling me this, I'm seeing this, I'm deducing this, we're going to invert the yield curve. And then when that inversion results in a recession, it was like, no, it was critical thinking. It was people unplugging from the matrix. It was elite performers performing in an elite way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Mr. Buffett, probably the biggest name example of that as well, right? That go off contra, but unplug from what you're talking about, as well. He's been pretty successful, I would say, as well. The donkey comment is an interesting one, because I was sitting in the Peninsula Hotel in Manila in the Philippines in the mid-2000s when that happened. And we had our global wealth product head there, who was he was Mexican. And this guy really knew how to unplug from the matrix. And we were debating whether or not the country wanted I was a regional product head, so I had to approve any particular wealth instruments that we would distribute to consumers. So we were sitting in the lobby of the hotel the night before the meeting. It was a Sunday night, I remember. We flew in, took a shower, went down, had dinner, drinks. And we're talking about whether or not we should distribute Filipino bonds. Okay. And our general policy was not to distribute any form of local, because of the currency risk associated. Anyway, the point was that the country was presenting to us that these things stable, secure, 1,000 reasons why we should do it. But the one thing that they omitted from what they were presenting to us was the currency risk associated with that. That obviously we had a lot of clients that traded in multiple currencies, right? So they might buy it in Filipino bonds are only available in the peso. Okay. So, but a lot of our clients convert money to dollars, to, different Singapore dollars, different currencies. So they withheld that. And I remember the guy looked at me and he said, Bret, they've dressed this thing up to make it look like it's a pure bond risk. But to the end client, if it's a donkey, it's a donkey. They're trying to make the donkey look like a horse, right? And it's not. So you call it for what it is. And that's really the advice here is to unplug, like you mentioned, Phil. That's a great way to put it, right? Unplug from this. Have a look at, your environment, what you're doing, and identify the donkeys and call them a donkey. Don't dress them up, because you start to dress it up, right? Then you're going to get into all sorts of other troubles out there. And it's just a matter of time before that is exposed, right? And so because markets will catch up. Markets are pretty smart and they will catch up.
If I could just follow up on this, Kev, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So because whether you talk about running a business or you talk about financial markets and instruments therein, there's risk if we all knew what the outcome was, right? Then we'd all be, not having this conversation. We'd be on our own island, right, drinking our own self-made drinks. So there's inherent risk in running a business. There's inherent risk in investing and in the financial markets. So one of the things that I think that, I've looked at from a cap market standpoint and then from a business approach standpoint is I really need to understand all the risks and all the opportunities. Yeah. There's risk enough in and of itself, right? So that's really where the donkey thing resonates with me. And I don't know, we're allowed to curse on here, Kev, but Burgess Meredith in Grumpy Old Men, you could wish in one hand and crap in the other and see which one fills up first. So, so what we talk about is we're all honest liars, and these half-truths to try to, I want to put this one on a tee a little bit for you, is you talk about elite performing and understanding the shot and not dressing up the donkey. How important do you see it when making investment decisions, when making business decisions, to have the entire story, to understand you're going to take chances, you're going to make, risky decisions, but you have to understand the risk, not try to pretend or bury it or shit in your hand hoping for an outcome.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I just like to, I'm really glad you brought this up, because the key to this, in addition to, I'll answer your question in a second, but the key is to understand those risks, plural, before you buy it or before you take your move in the secondary market, in the primary market, not after. And if you have a look at where a lot of the egg on the face is, or even, worse than that, people, FTX is a great example, right? A lot of people lost a lot of money. They saw the upside. It can't go down. It's not going to happen. So they're dressing up the donkey there. But the people then found out about the real risks after they bought it and after they lost their money. So the point on investing, making these kinds of important decisions involving money, all comes down to not only the risk tolerance and understanding the donkey, but understanding it before you take action. There are so many people, guys, that take decisions and they don't have the information that we're talking about here. So you've got to get that info. You've got to slow down and get it. I know markets move quickly, but that's why you have to have your values. And one of your values needs to be risk assessment before purchase or commitment. Yeah, does that make sense? Does that help?
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
I was just reading a book and they said people always want to do the postmortem, right? To find out why they failed and what happened.
Yeah.
Not enough people do the premortem, right? So I think in business, sometimes we listen to somebody and we believe what they're saying, because we trust them, but we don't really do any more research on it and we let it go. And then the failure happens, 6 months on the road and say, well, how did that happen? Well, because I took it at face value and I didn't do any pre-mortem and see what was going on there. But I want to really get into building elite teams because I think this is what's needed in our industry, because there's a reason that EPM is growing where other people are contracting. And you and I have a lot in common when we talk about this. And I want you to explain it to everyone that's listening because they think I'm crazy and I must be doing something magical, or Phil's doing something different with the rates. Now, our rates aren't the best. Our service is good, but it's the team we built. It's knowing the difference between an A player and a C player and how toxic that C player could be in ruining a team from inside out. So what do you look for when you're building that team? How do you know when it's time to pull that C player out? That's what I'd really like to hear. And I think anyone that's listening, that's why they're tuned in. They want to know how to really tweak their team and get into the next level.
Yeah. So I guess mainly, so your question, Kevin, mainly would be directed at the leaders that are putting together these teams, right?
Correct. Right.
Is that okay? Good. Okay. That's good. So the first premise is that you're in any team of any notable size, a team of 3 people, this doesn't apply to, but a team of, 10 plus people, 100. I've managed teams of tens of thousands of people. You're always going to have amongst those teams what I'll call terrorists, right? I know a lot of people don't like that word, but they are. They just don't. They're trying to get a free ride, and you have to acknowledge the fact that you're going to always have those. Rule number 1: don't get sucked in to spend. They love to drain your time, to drain your battery. So you have to find ways to detect them. We can talk about that if you want, but once you detect them, okay, you got to get them out. You got to cut the cord because they are not going to improve. They'll beg for training. They'll beg for, can you send me a course on attitude? You're telling me that I have a bad attitude. They're not going to do that. So you need to make sure that your performance measurement system has a category in there. What we used to do it around, we called it colleague. And part of that was teamwork. It involved feedback, not only from the manager, but from the peers, and it applied to everybody. So it was one component of the teamwork. It also, we also looked at, you've got a leader putting together these teams, and then they've got their sub teams. Okay. Your business probably has a similar thing. And you should make sure that you're assessing those leaders or managers on the number, not just are they meeting their target and their goal, but are they able to, what percent of the people under them are actually being successful? And you're going to then you can start to dig, and you'll start to identify, okay, just as common as you have an elite performer, you have a C performer. Get rid of those people when you detect them, and do it quickly, because they're not going to change. Okay. They're not going to change. Do I believe in second chances? Yeah, for some things, but not in sales, regardless of this, because they're not going to cut it. Help them find a job at the competitor. That's what I would do on that. Okay. So in putting together elite teams, make sure that you're really well connected to your very best performers, the people that are bringing in the gravy for you. They're doing it that way. They can't break policy, but you know who these people are. And these people, you need to give them as much freedom as possible. They cherish freedom. Your top people, they despise micromanagement, right? So you got to give them some breathing space. You got to, if you're going to change a policy around the timing that you change rates, for example, or whatever, just seek their opinion before you do it. Doesn't mean you're going to do it that way, but you need to make them feel part of the managerial decisions that you're making around the business that would impact them. Same thing on process changes. You're going to do something you're going to change the process of the day 0 of an application, or day 15 of the closing, whatever it might be in that regard. We used to always have a little circle of people. We called a round table we get these people together and go through it that way. Build things like record breakers, because you want your elite performers to compete against themselves, because they really do that anyway. But record breakers do build some additional reward and recognition systems. It doesn't have to be your cash systems, but the cash incentive systems, but it could be something like we used to do nice dinners on the bay back in San Francisco back in the 90s when we did it that way, and we did the same thing. I used to do cruises in Tokyo Bay in Japan for our very best performers that would break their own record. Okay. So it wasn't based on a goal. It was based on them breaking their own record, and we would reward people. So you want to do things differently that are aligned with how an elite performer thinks. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I'm going to kind of pause right there and let you guys have at me. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love for you to opine on this, in terms of, those of us who are leaders leading other leaders, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And making decisions around staffing is two-part question. One, how much of that and how much introspection does a leader require when, to your point, you need to let elite performers fly? That can be difficult for a leader who wants to control at times. But then at the same time, I've found in many leaders where they're unable to let elite performers fly, they're equally unable to make the tough decisions on the so-called donkeys, because it almost becomes personal, right? The donkey's failure is the leader's failure. I'd love for you to, opine on that thought and how you've been maybe able to either yourself or leaders below you, how you've been able to manage around that. A leader's own sort of, self difficulties around ego and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? It's a great question because, you have to think about these leaders managing leaders. Usually, not in all cases, but usually these people that have been promoted up to those roles have had no training in leadership. They're top individual contributors that have done well. And guess what? Hey, Phil, I'm going to give you a pat on the back. I'm promoting you because you have knocked the socks off of your target here. And without you, we would be nothing. And then you feel good. And then you get there and guess what? Monday morning rolls around and you're all of a sudden the leader. And all you really know how to do is do what? Is to sell or be an individual contributor, right? So one of the things that I think, and I think this is a massive failure in companies, especially in the United States. We've heard a lot about the Great Resignation and people leaving toxic environments. Well, one of the reasons is that I'm going to give you an analogy here. I like to give analogies because people can really resonate. Let's say that you've got part of your sales force they're all fish, okay? Some of them are freshwater fish. Some of them are saltwater fish. So we all know that saltwater fish thrive really well in saltwater, but if you put them in freshwater, they don't do so well, and vice versa. Most people basically say, get rid of the fish. Okay, if I've got saltwater in my ecosystem, right, in my tank, the freshwater fish, you're going to have to go. But these freshwater fish, they might be just what you need. So the best leaders, you've got to put together programs. This is some of the work that I do, for example, where you change the composition of the water. Because most people are just cranking out the fish, just get rid of if you don't fit the system, you get out, right? But you've got to change the water where you can accommodate different types of fish. Now, they still have to perform, okay? And your performance management system will take care of that. But specifically to your question, Phil, with that as a backdrop, okay, understanding that maybe you need to treat in your performance management system the top quartile differently than the middle band of your performers as well. And not maybe, it actually is the case, right? And so you need to don't let off on the micromanagement a lot with that top quartile. Maybe force some activities with the next two quartiles as well. The bottom, you're going to fire, and you're always going to have, dynamic rejections there. But these middle two are going to make or break you. And these middle two, you're going to have, I don't know, we used to have, I'm going to overly simplify it so people get it. Part of changing the water here is that we're going to have a pizza night on Tuesday, and we're going to make phone calls. Because you ain't making your calls, right? Or you're going to listen. The second and third quartiles are going to listen to I don't know if you tape conversations. We used to tape conversations for compliance reasons. And if you can't, if you guys don't do that, what you can do is you can have people listen in on your elite top quartile performers, their approach with their first meeting or second meeting, depending on your sales process that way, but where it's forced learning with the top people, because the top people we know how to do it, right? That type of thing. So that would be an example of providing these leaders that manage leaders with these types of ideas so that they know, don't just fire people if they're not making their number. That you have to learn how to lead these people and change the composition of the water a bit so that they can actually perform. Because at the end of the day, everybody just wants to perform. I really believe that everybody does, except for those bottom people that aren't very good anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll get another analogy that you just brought up, and it made me think of something: freshwater and saltwater. I think back when I was 30 years old, young in my career, they constantly say, I want you to lead. I want you to lead. Just because I'm a great producer doesn't mean I'm going to be a great leader. Right. At that point in my life, I didn't want to lead people. I could still hit, 40 home runs, steal 40 bases. So they said,
make more money. Yeah,
exactly. We're going to make you a manager. I did it. I wasn't a great manager. That wasn't right for me, but I was a good, area sales manager. I was better with my small team because we contributed, and it took me a while to feel, okay, I'm ready now to share what I've learned with these people. But you said something else, and I think this comes back to Phil's point. It's like when you hire someone, you feel bad about getting rid of them. I used to have this attitude early on in my leadership career of, if they fail, I fail. And I had to get rid of that quick, because I was keeping around C players that didn't deserve to be here, because I thought I wasn't doing a good job leading them. But I listened to one of your posts, hard work and attitude beat talent every day. So my hard work, I can't make somebody have my work ethic. I can't make someone have my drive, my determination. But excuse me, but as a leader, if you're not demonstrating that to your people, they're not going to do it either. So it's this fine balance of, how do I, let go of that if they fail, I fail, but still come in and bring 110%, actually 100%, because there's no such thing as 110%, 100% of myself, and 100%, and make sure my team is giving me 100% of them. If they're not, I got to part ways.
Yeah, you're right. And the latest Top Gun Maverick movie, where, for those of you that have seen it, if you haven't seen it, by the way, everybody should see it. And here's why: is that nobody really believed that the mission could be done until he broke protocol as a leader and got out there, and on the simulation he got it done and beat the time. Then everybody became a believer, and then they followed. Okay. So, and that is a great example, Kevin, of what you mentioned, that fine balance here that Tom Maverick in the movie said, you know what, I'm going to show them it can be done, and give them the belief. Okay. And that's what a leader does. It turned out in the movie that he wound up going on the mission and not just, being in the leadership role, but he was the leader of the mission, and they were going to follow him, to their grave. Right. And they did, and it was successful. So the leaders need to show the way. It doesn't mean that they're going to personally, individually solicit mortgages and that kind of thing, but those tough sales that need to be made. Okay. Sometimes they need to go with a person. Right. But it's not a person in the first quartile, that isn't they don't need to do that. Right. They need to go help somebody down below because they actually have those skills, right? But it's a lot like getting back to fishing, right? As a leader, I'll give you the fishing pole, the line, the bait, and I'll show you how to fish, but I'm not going to catch fish for you. Okay. So I'm going to tool you up and work it that way, but you're then on your own. And it does come down to attitude plus hard work equals performance. It doesn't matter high talent, low talent, because if you've got high talent with a bad attitude, they got to go too, right? Because that's not going to be, they're probably going to break all your compliance rules. By the way, they might be good in sales, but they're, so those people, they got to go too, even though they might be kind of at the top on sales, but they're not on compliance. So you've got to kind of balance this out. And these leaders, back to the question, leaders managing leaders, they need to have the kind of conversation that we're having right now, so that everybody can kind of understand. We acknowledge the fact that you're a 20-year individual contributor, and now we're putting you in charge of 8, 10, 12 people. But some things are going to have to be a little bit different. And this is we want to show you. I'm going to put you for 30 days with our best sales manager, and they're going to show you what they do. Something like that. Right. And that's where most firms fall down, because they just promote these people up and expect the money to come in. Yeah.
So here's a question for you, Bret. If I ask you for sort of a cheat sheet, right? Hey, I'm starting a business. I kind of feel like I know what elite performers look like, but I'm really not sure. Can you maybe give me, and I want you to give me a little card with some cliff notes on it. Yeah. What might be the top 3 things that you have found to be consistent among elite performers, and say the top 3 things that are either consistent among donkeys or that elite performers absolutely don't have, sort of things to look for and the things to avoid like the plague.
Yeah, the red flags. Yeah. So first of all, on the former question, so 3 things that I learned kind of working around the world with this top band of people. One is the preparation is always there. Okay. And by the way, it's not preparing for the same thing over and over again. They prepare once for something and then they start preparing for something else. Right. So that's number one, is that they learn everything they can about the trade. They learn everything they can about in your business, for example, mortgage business, rates play a huge part. We all know that. They learn everything that they can and can't say about the direction of rates and the particular product or solution that they're going to use to help the client buy a house, okay, as an example, or an investment property. So number 1 is preparation. Number 2 is trusting that preparation. How many people do you know that do a great job getting ready for something, and then the heat is on, the pressure's on, and then they're paralyzed. Right. They start to doubt, and this self-doubt in their preparation. So this elite band, what they do, they prepare, they trust that preparation. And then number 3 is that they do what they prepare. So it doesn't become these endless things of worthless training programs that, they're making me do this and that kind of thing. In other words, it's relevant. These elite performers are relevant, and their activities prepare, trusting their preparation, and taking action. Because if you look on the flip side of the coin, that your second question is, what do the people that don't perform, what do they do? Well, number 1 is they love to be full-time students. So they love to be sent to training, because then they're not out there having to sell, and they're not meeting their goals anyway, right? But they think, well, I can get another month's salary here and that type of thing. So I would just contrast what the elite people do. These non-elite people, they become full-time students, right? And you have to be a doer and implement action to avoid being a full-time student, okay? Because full-time students, they don't make us money, right? It just
They
doesn't
cost us
doesn't work
money.
that way. Yeah, they cost you a lot of money, right? And so I would say I think people kind of get the point on the red flags to watch out for. Other things is that sucking. I call them battery drainers. They wind up sucking the time of your leaders. There's here's a big one. Compliant. There's always compliance issues. Applications. Maybe in your business you might look at applications rejected. I don't know. We used to look at that in some of our loan products, but you look at application quality, and they always had a higher reject rate, and it was the same people. And guess what? When you correlate it to their production, total correlation. So they don't produce anyway. So, and then they're creating all these headaches, and your cost of compliance is going up. And then people in the risk area say, well, we need to tighten the policy here. And they wouldn't need to tighten the policy if the sales leaders would get better people on their teams. And then you could have a little bit looser policy, give people more wiggle room, and that quality it's risk and return, right? Is it to work through that way? So it does have a ripple effect and will impact negatively elite performers if you have too many of these bad performers, right? Because the policy will wind up driving these people out of the bank or out of the firm.
Yeah, I would give you another one for the bottom three. They always say they're gaining momentum. That's their favorite word.
Traction. Traction was the word. We had a guy 20 years ago. Whenever I hear the word traction, I want to run for the hills. The word traction.
I love it. Yeah.
It's going to put me in traction.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. I mean, I'll accept traction and I'll accept it, but I want to see it every day. And I want you to show me the last 5 days, that traction. So explain it to me and I'll buy it if you can show me the last 5 days. Okay, you brought it up. Today's Friday. So show me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and today. Show me the traction, okay? And then show me what next 5 days are going to be like. And then we're going to have another meeting in a week. And then we'll jointly agree on whether or not it's traction.
Yeah. I love that because when you talk about mortgages and investing, they're both very similar in that they're pipeline businesses. Okay.
Yes.
So you have a pipeline of leads, and then you have a pipeline of appointments back in the day or calls, and then you have a pipeline of loans, or maybe somebody's made a deposit but you haven't deployed the investments. So there's often many steps in between contact and cashing a paycheck. So there is a nuance and an artistry to understanding the difference between real traction and sort of kicking the can fake traction. That's and if you have anything further you could say about that, would love to hear.
I do. And I'm so glad you brought, I didn't know that our conversation I'd love to talk about this stuff because we're talking about, sales process and how to really run it. And you've just brought up an important point around pipeline. And we used to do something around the world. Every leadership sales manager job that I had, I learned it from a great one of my mentors back in the San Francisco days in the early 1990s, and that is around the pipeline. So we used to do and this was a bank, right? So and we'll do it based on business loans, for example. Everybody had to have 50 people in their pipeline. And then we would label them very simple. This is just simple, stupid stuff. Hot, warm, and cold. Okay. And here are the rules. Hot is it's going to close next week. Warm is it's going to close this month. And cold is it's out there, but we kind of know there's probably some fake stuff in there, right? So that's fine. So here's the secret. So on Friday mornings, 7:00, I remember we used to get in the room where everybody had their coffee, and boy, it was intense. So Brett, we'd go around the room and I'd say, Kevin, walk us through your pipeline. So we'd all have the page there. And it was it didn't involve a lot of administrative work. And you would discuss, I want to talk today about your hot leads. So you would say, well, I got 2, Brett, and I got 48 are distributed between warm and cold. But these 2, one of them is going to close next Tuesday and the other is going to close next Friday. So here's the secret. So we'd make a note of that. And then next Friday, we would sit there. Hey, Kevin, your turn. So first of all, can you confirm that that the two hots closed this week, and how do you feel? And then you'd get we'd make you feel good, right? Because after you do this for about a month or two, people, then it gets really intense, because the key is where most sales managers fall flat on their face is that they do this stuff, but they don't follow
Gold.
up. Yeah, it's gold. There you go. It's gold, right? Not cold, but gold. And so here's the other beauty of this very simple 1990s type of process, right? Forget the sophisticated computers.
But wait a minute. But Bret, 1990s. Who cares about the 1990s?
I know, exactly.
This
That's
can't
right.
work. This cannot work what you're saying in 2023.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. But if you talk to the majority of people, we want this app. Here's another thing that bad performers want. I need a technology.
Technology. Oh, love it.
Yeah, give me better technology, right?
Yes.
I heard it. I heard this in Japan. I heard this in England. I heard it in Africa. Yeah,
That's what it costs. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the other tip, just to close out the pipeline thing. So we talked about the hot thing and following through. Now, a lot of people don't have hot leads, right? Because they're not selling. So then they would have to talk about, well, let's talk about these 10 warm leads that are going to close out this month. What do you need to do in the next 5 days to convert them into hot leads, so that the following week we can, and so there's some very interesting dialogues. And what we did is everybody had to present all of this in 3 minutes, because you got to get it done. Otherwise you're there all day, right? And, we were done by 9 o'clock. So it took 2 hours, and we go around the room. There were probably 20 of us, something like that. And boy, those were the most productive. We never had to worry about pipeline in the future. Now and the coaching happened right there on the spot. And then everybody left, and everybody, went out and had to, and they were held accountable. And boy, some people just dreaded those Fridays, but the sales went up because people didn't want to get embarrassed from the boss, the following Friday.
And the Pikers probably found their own way out the door because they got tired of not.
Peer pressure was a big thing. They would start looking for other jobs, and that made it easier to kind of manage them out, as well.
It's easy to read the room, right? Successful people don't fear accountability. Successful people embrace accountability. They tack it head on. The people that are shrugging their shoulders and get all nervous, they're the ones. Those C-level players, they fear accountability. When you start holding people accountable on a weekly, daily basis, you will see who the strong are and who the weak are. I present numbers every day to my leadership team. They present it to their team every day. Every day, I know who gave me 100%. I know who gave me 50%. It's just numbers don't lie in our industry. So accountability is king. I love that you said that. I think that more people, they're all making excuses now in this market of it's the rates, we're not enough buyers, not enough borrowers. Right. BS. As long as your competitors in business, there's business to be gotten. Go attack your competitors with their clients. No more excuses.
Yeah, I mean, we did a cultural transformation when I worked for Barclays in the UK, and we viewed the target market. If there's a customer, it was with Barclays Bank, and we said, and we produced data around the foot traffic that was walking into Lloyd's Bank, a huge competitor, right? And RBS and all these other banks as well. And we said, as long as there's a customer inside of that competitor branch, that client should be in our bank, right? And so that eliminated the excuses of, well, people just aren't coming in, or, we're not getting the kind of foot traffic that we'd like to get. And, and this, by the way, what I'm describing was during the global financial crisis, and, when the credit crunch hit. And I was in Europe at the time, and we had just done a cultural transformation. So times, as you guys know, were really tough then. And we set out on a mission, and we made 4 million phone calls in 6 months, just to kind of, when the crisis hit. Because people were worried about their money and concerned, and because it was bad. You'll remember that, and we forced people to get on the phone, and boy, it paid off. We started gaining market share. Those people that were walking into other branches started to come into our branches because they had a product with us. So they would get a call from us, right? And they had 3 products at the competitor. Well, they would then bring those other products over as well. So it makes that's how you should look at a tough, if I was running a mortgage business right now, not being familiar with it, not having done that for a long time, many decades actually, I would take this rate environment as an opportunity, higher rate environment. And maybe I'm going to do fewer tickets, but bigger sizes. We'd have to, I don't know, we'd have to figure out how that works and that type of thing. But this classic stuff that we're talking about is, I had a boss one time that he called it the case of the rising tides. In your business, when rates are low, everybody does well. And when rates rise, then not all the boats float to the top. You get dead bodies floating to the top too. And that's when you really find out who's good, right? So it's an opportunity to upgrade and steal people from the competition, producers. But you can only do that if you're managing out the bad people.
No, that's spot on.
Yeah.
What I would say about a lot of what you said here, and I'm definitely lockstep on it, Bret, is, I've often equated sort of business to physics, and things in motion tend to stay in motion, and things at rest tend to stay at rest. And,
yeah, you're right.
That's, to me, that's the delta between elite performers and non-elite. And certainly that bottom quartile and to your point, I do think people inherently want to succeed, and they just don't know how. And I've said there's no such thing as a bad employee. You either hired the wrong person, put them in the wrong position, or haven't given them the tools. And that's that saltwater, freshwater analogy that you used. And so when you're an elite performer, you don't have time to deal with the bullshit, okay? And when you're not an elite performer, you're consumed by the lack of production.
Yeah.
You are dragged down, anchored, if you will,
spot on.
by the lack of work. I've got nothing to do today, so I'm going to do even less work. It's not a conscious thing. So can you share how, because cutting the cord is difficult, right? But necessary. And so how do you identify as a leader when it's time to cut that bottom quartile? But even, dare I say, before you do that, what are some things you might do? Some tactics that you might deploy in a one, last gasp attempt to move that bottom quartile or the bottom half up the ladder.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you do have to do that. And there's also legal reasons why you have to do that as well in some jurisdictions, right? So, for example, in Japan, I worked in Japan. In Japan, you don't fire people. I don't know if you guys know that, but you don't, it's culturally unacceptable to fire somebody. Now, if they do a fraud, they do a scam, something like that, of course you can do it that way. But in Japan, the punitive mechanism is I demote you. That's what happens, right? And so, but anyway, whether it's in that environment or an environment cold-blooded like the U.S., for example, your question is, how do you actually, your last-ditch effort to notch those people up and that type of thing as well? And it's some of the things that we talked about, this pipeline process that we talked about. Well, let me give you a more macro view. To me, there's 6 steps to a world-class sales process. Number 1 is planning. Let me just rattle them off. Planning, tracking, coaching, tools, performance management, and recognition. So let's just slice those up really quick. So number 1 is plan. Plan your work your plan. So these people that you're mentioning specifically, Phil, I want to see your sales plan. So the elite people, I don't need to see your plan. I know you got it. And you're probably carrying around in your purse or your wallet or your head. And I'm okay with that because you're bringing it in. So I don't waste your time filling out an Excel spreadsheet on what your activities are. But these people, your question is not at those people. It's these other people here. And so I want to see the plan. So what are your calls, contacts, appointments, conversion rates? Okay, what are they? And we're going to talk about that in the coaching box here in a second. But that's what a plan is. So let's break it down. Number 2, tracking. Okay, you get what you measure, right? So when Kevin talks to his people, you mentioned you're sharing numbers. So are these the same numbers that are hanging up in the lunchroom or the break room or in people's face? When you're having these dialogues with them, what are you tracking too many things? One of the things that I remember, first things we did in Japan, they were tracking like 14, typical Japanese, 14, 20 things, and we simplified it down to 4.
Yeah.
And saw a huge uplift, right? So make sure you're tracking. And by the way, make sure that what you're tracking are inputs and outputs, right? So you got leading indicators, lagging indicators, right? You got to have both. So your leading are calls, contacts, appointments, right? And then of course your lagging are sales, revenue, however you measure it. So planning, tracking, that tracking is number 2. That's really important. You get what you measure. Number 3, the coaching. The coaching's the pipeline that we talked about earlier in this process. So that alone will be a huge help. You can bolt on some things to that, joint calls as well, right? You can have somebody tag along with an elite performer as long as it doesn't get in their way. You can have the sales manager go, so you guys get the drift on that. The next one are sales tools. So I don't know I would imagine that with all the technology out there today and laptops, iPads, I imagine you have some tools that are out there that should help people kind of get the mind. If I was in your business, I'd want to get my mind off of just the rate. Take a step back and what are you really trying to do? You're trying to help people buy a home, right? I mean, isn't that really ultimately 100%. What you're doing? Or
I would take it a step further. We're not trying to help people buy a home. We're trying to help people create a family, create memories around that family.
There you go. So hopefully there's some tool out there. And if you have some, great. And if you don't, get some of your elite performers, say, hey, what do you think we should do here to tool? What would you like to see that would make this easier for you? And then build it off the highest denominator, not the lowest denominator. Okay. And then have these other people.
Love that.
Yeah, right. Build it. And most people fail, Phil, because they build things off the lowest denominator. And then guess what happens? Then you wind up having your top people have to comply with something that they say, this is ridiculous, right? So build it off the highest denominator. That's step 4, the tools box. Step 5 is the performance management. So what is the so make it a little bit easier for your sales manager. Say, this is our performance management process. If you don't meet your numbers in 60 days, you go on a PIP, a performance improvement plan. And then you've got 30 days, and then, you got to do this. You need to define those parameters, and then you have to hold them accountable for it. So everybody understands that if I don't produce, and remember the elite, your top performers, they don't care about this because they're up there anyway. And it's always the same people anyway, right? So, but this is designed to help make it a little bit easier to get rid of the C players. And when the B players, B as in boy, will see what you're doing to the C players, and that puts a little bit more pressure on them, a little bit of intensity for them to kind of improve my game a little bit. And then the final one is your rewards and recognition piece as well. So in addition, let's just assume that you have your compensation system set really well where people can do well financially. I'll assume that. You want to do the non-monetary piece on here as well. Trophy, I've got behind me. Those are a lot of trophies that I got in my career as well. They mean a lot to me, right? They mean a lot to me to be the number 1 FX market share in Japan for 3-4 years running in foreign currency. That means a lot. And at that point, Japan was the second largest economy. It was bigger than China. And that is one of my most precious trophies that I earned. And I remember that more than I remember the cash bonus that I earned that year. So make sure you're doing some things like that tend to get lost in the digital age and all of this stuff as well. A lot of the traditional stuff, I would I would do that because people like hardware, hardware trophies. People like things with their name on it, and it's well worth the investment. So those are the 6 things that I would say. I've done these everywhere. Slight cultural modifications. Like I mentioned, in Japan, you don't fire people, you demote people. But for the most part, they work everywhere.
Love it.
Phil, I think we might have a lot of employees moving to Japan.
Well, they won't qualify for a visa. So.
Fred, I wanted we went so far over time, but this was such a great conversation. I really appreciate you dropped so many great bombs for anyone that's listening, for us internally to go back and really have real conversations over, you hear what Bret said around this topic and really dig in and help us improve. I know anyone that's listening said, yeah, I'm going to try this, this, and this. I mean, we have one question we ask everyone, and I already know the answer. How do you define your value? Your value is building elite teams, sharing your experiences and your knowledge with all of these great companies you work for, all these great teams you built, so you don't have to experience the same pain that Bret did. He's just giving you the secret sauce.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I'd like to, if I could just comment on that, because I think it's important and relevant to what your business, guys, is going through right now with these rates, right? Because I can only imagine what it's kind of like with what the Fed's done and what they're likely to continue to do as we even heading into an election year. But we'll see how that plays out. But I think that so what I also specialize in this elite performance amidst adversity. So to make it even more complicated, I only take on people that are dealing with adverse situations. And I'll give you one more golden nugget to share with your people that will eliminate all excuses at any time. I've been through the Asian financial crisis in the late 90s. I've been through the post 9/11. I was in Japan for 6 years when that tragedy happened, and the aftermath was unbelievable in the financial sector, as you know. And then obviously the global financial crisis. I was in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Adversity quotient, AQ. A lot of people hadn't heard of it. Okay. And just ask your leaders if they've heard of AQ. They've heard of IQ. They've heard of EQ. Some may have heard of EQ, but they don't really know what it is. And those things are important. Both you got to have a brain and you got to have some good emotional intelligence. But I don't spend a lot of my time on those things. I assume that they're in place, right? Where I spend time is on AQ, adversity quotient. And adversity quotient, there's 3 things that you need to do as a leader or an individual. And let's say the high interest rates, that's adversity right now for your sector. Number 1 is don't blame other people for what's happening. It's an important mindset thing. Number 2, don't blame yourself. Don't say, oh, I'm not producing. I'm not worthless. I'm worthless. A lot of people start to blame themselves for what happened. So don't play the blame game, right? And number 3, understand that this period of time that we're going through right now is limited in scope and duration. Okay. COVID's a great example. COVID, you talk about adversity, right? I mean, my goodness gracious. Well, it took a few years and it turned everything upside down, maybe even the global world order. We don't know that yet, but it hopefully we're near the end of it, right? The past couple of days, India is starting, and Singapore, I was reading right before we got on, they're starting to see a new variant that's concerning. Whenever Singapore gets concerned, I don't want to get off topic, I get concerned, and they're starting to get concerned about this new variant. But hopefully COVID is under control, and it's not going to be around forever to the degree that it was. So those 3 things around adversity, that's what your leaders need to have, that mindset, that have a strong AQ, and then you should never hear an excuse again for high rates.
I love it. This is a great episode. Yeah. Anyone that's watching, you should reach out to Bret if you need some help building your team, if you're going through that adversity, because everything he talked about today is just what you need. It's not as difficult as you make it seem. It's not as difficult as you tell yourself. Yeah. Right. And it's simple. Sometimes you got to cut ties with people and bring in new people. It's just, you got to put the company first and you'll continue to grow. And that's what it all comes down to. So Bret, Phil, thank you for being my special guest.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Bret. From henceforth, you shall be known as Bret the Truth Packard. If you sell those T-shirts, I want a small piece.
Okay, that sounds good, Phil. I enjoyed it. But Phil and Kevin, thanks. I have a lot of, as an ex-banker, global banker, I have a lot of respect for what you and your industry is going through right now with the high rates, because like we said at the beginning, it's been a long time since a lot of people, probably even on your sales force, have even seen, inflation like this and rates, on a big trend, right? So, and I have a feeling it's not going to stop anytime soon. So we'll see.
I want to thank everyone. You guys you could visit Empower Broker Community, our EPM wholesale website. You can always see El Pres. You should follow at El Presidente _EPM. He has the Mancuso Minute, choo. Bret is always on LinkedIn. I would tell you to consume as much of his content as you can. Bret, one thing I'll share with you, I started journaling because of how detailed your notes are. I'm becoming the best note taker ever. So thank you for that. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, everybody.